let's get started. So we are here to learn to become more sexually engaged, hosted by Uncovering Intimacy. I'm just feeling silly now. All right, so who am I? If you don't know, probably most of you do, but just in case, because sometimes I don't say all the things, I've been married 19 years to my wife, Christina. We have 5 children, ages 5 to 14, that we homeschool. That used to be a big thing. Now almost everybody's homeschooling, so it's less impressive now. We've been blogging. I've been blogging. Sometimes my wife blogs with me. I haven't got her to podcast yet, I don't think. Maybe one. Since 2012, about married sexuality from a Christian perspective. That's how we started. Then we started tackling a whole bunch of other things. And then along the way, people started asking me a whole bunch of questions and asking for help. So I started coaching, and I got a diploma in life coaching because I thought I might as well get better at this if I'm going to do this. And so, yeah, I've been trying to help couples with things that they don't really want to go to anyone else with their issues about. Especially pastors, for some reason. Well, no, not for some reason. I know the reason. They have nowhere to go to usually most of the time. Pastors have some really sad stories, to be honest. I feel bad for them. But I help lots of people, not just pastors. And I've been podcasting intermittently since 2015. I'm trying to become more mittened. I don't know. What's the habit? More regular. Intermittently is a weird word. There's no not intermittently. Like mittenly. Anyway, since 2015. That's 6 years now. Man. Anyways, so I created this webinar to help wives with a question that I've been getting for years. And some of these wives are newlyweds who have no sexual background at all, and no one that they feel comfortable talking to such taboo questions from. And they don't know how to engage sexually because they've just having sex is brand new to them. Others are women who've been married for years, but they've only recently become more aware of how important sex is in their marriage. And they've taken it upon themselves to be more sexually engaged. Others had kind of a good sex life during their marriage to date, but now they want to make it great and they don't really know how to start. And while these kind of 3 types of wives, and there are others who ask these questions, are all at very different stages of their marriage, the fundamental question, and I believe answer, is the same. And that's why I created the course that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to share the first module with you about. So today, answer that question from I'm going to answer it from a male's perspective, because, well, you're women, so you know the female perspective, and I think to be engaged, you kind of have to connect with the male's perspective, and sometimes trying to get that out of your husbands can be difficult. So I'm going to try to act sort of as a translator to answer the question. What do husbands mean when they say that they want their wife to be more sexually engaged? And because if you ask husbands, they'll usually give you like a list of activities. I've noticed this in the surveys that I run. You ask them, what would it mean for your wife to be more sexually engaged? They will always tell you the same things usually. It's like, oral sex, positions, places, times. Men are so goal-oriented and task-focused. We like checklists and actions to be accomplished because then we know that we've done a thing. But their lists point to something deeper. They point to their desires, their hopes, their fears. The problem is that most of them just lack the emotional awareness and vocabulary to actually express those. Most of them don't even know why exactly they want sex. They just know they do. But wives don't want a checklist. I think what most wives want is they want to understand their husbands. They want a closer relationship. And if you're watching this, you probably realize that part of your relationship, part of growing in intimacy, is going to be learning to be more sexually engaged. But you may not know where to start, because for you, a checklist probably isn't going to do the same thing as it would for your husband. If I hand a husband a checklist, he'll run off and go start doing it most of the time because that's clear instructions. For women, it doesn't quite work the same way. They can do the checklist, but it may not lead to what they want. You tend to be more interested in, that connection, that emotional. So what I thought I'd do with this course, and it seems to have worked out pretty well, is to try to be a translator for you so that you can understand what he means when he says that I want sex, or when he says he wants to see you naked, or when he gets grumpy if it's been a while, why he wants to do all these different things in bed. And it's hard to grow in this area of sexual intimacy because there's a lack of teaching regarding a biblical view of sexuality and sex in marriage. There's so much improper teaching regarding sex, especially in marriage, and stigma in Christian society about sex being bad and only bad girls enjoy sex is still there, despite all the churches saying that, oh no, we don't actually believe that. There's still this very deep fear regarding talking about sex, especially among grown adults. And when you don't talk about something, it makes it seem like it's bad because we only don't talk about things that we're shameful of. So this creates kind of a perfect storm, especially for Christian wives. You either have bad teachings or a lack of teachings, which set you up to fail from the beginning. And then the stigma makes you feel like you've done something wrong if you actually enjoy sex. And then a fear of discussing it makes you make sure that you can't actually get the support you need when you get married if you are having trouble. And somehow you're supposed to switch gears from this whole sex is bad, don't do it, to you need to have sex all of a sudden when you're married. Kind of the running joke is, sex is this dirty, sinful, terrible thing. Save it for the person that you love. And that's kind of the mixed message that we get. And it's no wonder that people have trouble with that. So I made this course called Becoming More Sexually Engaged, specifically for Christian wives, because I didn't see anybody else doing something like that. So we're going to go through the first module, which is just about learning how to be more receptive to your husband's advances. And it's, like I said, it's basically going to be telling you what sex means to your husband, and teaching you a bit about how sex is a part of a larger cycle in your marriage, and also what does the Bible have to say about sex, because I feel like those are kind of the three topics that where people get mixed up in. And when we ran our pilot group through this first module was where they saw the greatest gains. This was a foundation for the rest of it. The rest of it definitely helped, but this is what got them running when they hit the ground. And then we're going to end off with a challenge, because I like challenges. As a coach, I like to give out homework because I think homework drives things forwards. So each module in the course has 3 lessons. And lesson 1 of this one is understanding sexual rights and duties from a biblical perspective. And it's always interesting when I ask wives, when they start the course, there's worksheets that you have to do at the beginning of every lesson. And to do one of the questions on the worksheets is, what do you believe are your rights and duties in the marriage as it pertains to sex? And the answers that I get are all over the place. Some of them are like, oh, I have to do it to keep him happy. Some of them are, I don't understand what the question is. Some are, well, my body belongs to him. They rarely ever mention that, oh, his body belongs to me too. I guess they don't want that. And kind of you get this big span of answers, and almost all of them show that no one actually really taught them what it is. So we'll start with that. The church on the whole has done pretty much a terrible job of teaching biblical views of sexuality. That's basically why I started my entire blog way back long ago when I called it Sex Within Marriage. That's why I started, because I realized they didn't teach me anything, and if no one else is going to do it, well, maybe I can help. We spend so much time on married people to abstain from sex that we forget to encourage married people to have sex, and lots of it, and how to have good sex. So many grow up believing that sex is a necessary evil, this is another question that I ask in the course. What do you believe about sex? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it sinful? Is it a necessary evil? And a lot of people think that, yeah, sex is some kind of necessary evil, only kind of made acceptable by having children. And some wrongly believe that, sex is for their husbands, and wives only kind of, quote unquote, give it up to keep their husbands happy. So what does the Bible actually say about sex? Is sex sinful? Well, first off, I think you have to realize that God created the world, including sex. In Genesis 2, verse 24, which is before the fall, he writes, "Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." And that is a big euphemism in the Bible for, and they'll have sex. And then after he created everything, he created, man and woman, and he created them as sexual beings and stuck them in a garden naked, only for each other. And then looked at everything that he had made and said, "This is very good." And not only does it say very good, we kind of lose it a bit in English, but the Hebrew word for this actually gets translated in the Bible in a bunch of different ways, as beautiful and bountiful and cheerful and fine, good and pleasant and precious and sweet. And it has this connotation that is not only aesthetically pleasing, but it's also perfectly functional. And this is what God did. He created sex and then looked at it and went, "Yes, I did a good job there," along with everything else. So God believed that his creation, including the sex, was good. And that was before sin entered the world. This was his perfect created plan. And that sex is actually what defines a marriage in the Bible. In Genesis 24, a few chapters later, we have the story of Isaac and Rebekah. And if you don't know the story, Isaac's mother dies, and he goes to find a wife, and he brings her back home. And people often say, "No, look, see, this was a wedding." Isaac brought his wife to meet his mother, because it says, "Oh, he brought her into the tent of his mother." And they forget that, no, his mother had already died 3 years ago. So he was definitely not bringing her home to meet his mother. He was taking her into her tent as a symbolic, like, "No, this is my wife now, we're having sex." And that was it. There's no ceremony, there's no wedding, there's nothing. There's no party, there's no vows, no pastor. That's it. They just went, "Okay, we're husband and wife now, off we go, have sex." And that was it. So a marriage without sex is arguably not a marriage in biblical context. The Bible gives different reasons for sex. It gives us at least 3 good reasons to have sex that I can find. The first is procreation, which is obvious, just genetically. That's how we get new kids. But the second is intimacy, companionship, and pleasure, which I'm going to kind of lump together into one thing. And the third is avoiding temptation. Now, we have a tendency to focus on the first and the third. The first specifically because, well, you have kids, and that's what sex is there for. And the church taught that for years. In fact, if you go through the history of the Catholic Church and sex, it was basically a sin to have sex anytime that could not potentially result in procreation. They also narrowed down a whole bunch of other days that you weren't allowed to have sex, like Sundays and Wednesdays and any holy days and any feast days. And, well, if you had your period, well, then you couldn't, because you couldn't have a kid then. And if you were infertile, well, you probably shouldn't be having sex then either. And I think they narrowed it down to about 44 days of the year that you could actually have sex. Because, well, number one, procreation, that's the only reason you'd want to anyways. And then the church kind of came around a bit and went, "Oh, no, it's also good for avoiding temptation, because, we don't want these men having sex with other people. So you wives, you have to make sure that you're having sex with them," which is biblical, but I think they miss a big part of the story, and that's a second point, that intimacy, companionship, and pleasure is also built right into this. So sex for procreation, we'll go through this quickly because I think everybody knows this. God created man and earth. He created us as pairs, and he created us male and female so that we could have children. And in fact, the first commandment in the Bible is telling us to have sex, to prosper, to reproduce, to fill the earth. If that's not a commandment to have sex, I don't know what is. But there's also this concept of sex for intimacy, companionship, and pleasure. If you read the book of the Song of Solomon, it's full of sexual imagery, clearly between loving spouses. It's playful and intimate. In fact, I've heard that Jewish husbands used to read Song of Solomon to their wife one day of the year. I can't remember which one it was. It escapes me. But they would have this habit of once a year, they would read the entire thing to their wife as a love poem. And just to remind them that, hey, this is a good thing. And sex is supposed to be for our pleasure. It's supposed to be fun. If you read it, it's not like, oh, and then they had sex and they begat so-and-so. It's clearly not about procreation. There's no mention of having children, I don't think, in the whole thing. But there's sex in the vineyards and just out in the open, and they're having fun and they're chasing each other and they're talking about all these things that they want to do together. And yeah, it's playful and it's fun and it's intimate. It's companionship and it's pleasure. And actually, going back, I forgot another one. There's a story in the Bible of David after he takes Bathsheba, which is not a great story, but as payment for his crime, God actually takes. Was it that crime? No, it was a different one. Anyways, he ends up losing his son, and his wife Bathsheba she's obviously upset about it. And the Bible says that the way David comforts her is that they have sex. So I should add in here, sex is for intimacy, companionship, pleasure, and comfort. And lastly, sex is for avoiding temptation. I think everybody knows this verse. If you've been doing any kind of research about Christian marriage and sexuality, this is the verse that comes up all the time. Abstaining from sex is permissible for a period of time if you both agree to it, and it's for the purposes of prayer and fasting, but only for such times. Then come together again. Satan has an ingenious way of tempting us when we least expect it. And this time of year is very interesting because I'm not sure exactly which denomination or which branch of Christianity does fast at this time of the year. It's not mine, so I'm not sure. But all of a sudden, I start getting a whole bunch of people asking questions about fasting and sex. And if you know why, please let me know, because I'm curious. And I never get around to asking them. But there's a lot of people saying, oh, I'm fasting and praying this month, but my spouse doesn't want to stop having sex. What do I do? And I always have to send them this verse and say, look, the verse says you both have to agree. If you don't, then I think it's more like the other verse that says, hey, if you have a problem with your brother while you're off making a sacrifice, go and fix your problem with your brother first before you make your sacrifice. Because I think trying to deny your spouse intimacy while trying to claim to be fasting and praying to God, I think is a little bit hypocritical. But anyways, this is the same verse just in the New King James. Do not deprive each other, except for consent for a time. And so your rights in the Bible, your rights for marriage are sex. Nobody gets married thinking that, oh, well, sex is just not going to happen. That's kind of part of the package deal. If you don't want to have sex, don't get married. That's kind of the way the whole Bible is written. And it tells us, a wife doesn't have authority over her own body, but the husband does. And likewise, the husband doesn't have authority over his own body, but the wife does. And I think a lot of people think about that first part and not about the second part. I think a lot of wives feel like, oh, well, that's not fair. I have to give up my body. But this is reciprocal. And it's not just about sex. 2 verses earlier, it says, let the husband render to his wife the affection due her, and likewise also the wife to her husband. So it's not just about sex. It's about having a loving relationship. However, interestingly, in the Old Testament, one of the 3 reasons a wife could divorce her husband was if he didn't provide her with sex. The assumption in the Old Testament seems to be that the women would want sex more than the husbands. There are actually rules to say that, the husbands are not allowed to leave home in the first year that they get married because it would be unfair to the wife. In Jewish laws, they actually had rules to say, well, depending on your employer, like your employment, your job, they would limit how long that you could be away from home and how often that you should have sex with your wife, because the assumption was that you were due sex to your wife, not the other way around. Funny enough, for rabbis, I think it was something like twice a day, because they worked out of their own houses. But the Bible is not really about rights and duties. It's more about giving generously, giving of your attitude and your heart and your mind and your body. The way sometimes that we read it, if we take all the individual verses, it tends to look very kind of contract-like. You owe this and they owe this. But if you read it as a whole and read all the verses about love as well, our entire relationships are about giving of ourselves for our spouse's benefit, giving them what they need, what they want, living for them. And then ideally, they do the same for us. But even if they don't, we still keep doing it. If you read the book of Hosea, for example, it is an entire book about this prophet of God who is told to marry this prostitute. And he just gives her everything. He just loves her and loves her and loves her while she still continues to go out being a prostitute, getting pregnant, giving birth to another kid, bringing him home, and then she goes out and does it again and again and again until Hosea is raising a whole bunch of his own. He just keeps loving his wife. And at one point, God actually tells him, okay, enough is enough. I made the point, because it was a metaphor for what I was doing to God, that Israel was cheating on him, being idolatrous. And at one point, God says, okay, Hosea, it's enough. You can stop. It's too hard. And Hosea kind of looks at God and says, well, what are you going to do? And God says, I'm sticking with Israel because I promised to love them. And Hosea says, well, I'm going to do the same thing. And it ends up working out for Hosea. His wife actually finally realizes what she's doing to him and stops. And it's wonderful. But the point is, she may not have, and he just kept giving and giving and giving. And I think that's really what our duty is in marriage, to give and give and give as long as we can, and to give it generously and lovingly. Yeah, that goes both ways. So as much as women want their spouse to open up kind of emotionally to them, what he wants tends to be for you to open up physically. And in fact, I'd argue that they're the same thing. They just don't look like it, probably from your perspective. So let's talk about what sex means to your husband. Now, in the Bible, I think it teaches us that true intimacy requires understanding. In the Bible, sex is called knowing your spouse. If you read all the verses, whenever they said, oh, so-and-so had sex with this other person, they said, and they knew them. It's the Bible's euphemism for sex. And part of knowing your husband is understanding him. And I think that understanding is important for compassion, because if you don't understand what sex means to your husband, the Bible's counsel on marital rights and duties, the sex cycles, your husband's behavior, they all seem unfair and cruel. And this is the argument that I get from people all the time. It's like, oh, it's not fair. It's not right. It's one-sided. And I say, well, then you're missing the point, because you might look at it and go, well, all he thinks about is sex, and all he wants me for is sex. I've heard that from so many wives. I heard it from my own wife for years, especially in the first years of our marriage, where things were not so good and we didn't communicate well at all. So what does sex mean to your husband? For husbands, most of them, I talk to them, and sex means feeling connected. It means feeling loved. It means feeling cared for, both emotionally and physically. And for a lot of wives, that might not make a lot of sense because women tend to think very differently than men, and you have different chemicals in different quantities than men do, and your brains are actually wired different than ours as well. I think many wives think that sex is all about just the physical feelings for men. That, oh, well, he just wants to, relieve this pressure, or he just wants it to feel good. He just wants sex for sex's sake. But for men, it's one of the only really truly emotionally bonding experiences that we can have. I think sex means more emotionally to many men than to most women. And the reason for that is a hormone called oxytocin. Hormone? Neurotransmitter? Sometimes I get them mixed up. Yeah, hormone. Pretty sure it's a hormone. Anyways, I've been studying way too much about neurotransmitters lately. So sometimes I get them mixed up between which is one and which is the other. And honestly, I'm not really sure if one is, maybe they're both the same thing in some cases. I don't have a background in biology, but I'm learning. So let me teach you about oxytocin, though, what I do know about it. Oxytocin is, you've probably heard it before, it's called the bonding hormone or the love hormone. It's what makes you feel connected and emotionally bonded to another person. Women get a whole bunch of oxytocin when they're pregnant. It's what makes you feel connected to your baby even before it's born. When you start breastfeeding, you get even more oxytocin because it's what makes you, again, feel connected to your baby, because babies can be really frustrating sometimes, especially when they wake up every 2 hours. And oxytocin is what makes you not want to kill them, because it makes you want to protect them and it makes you feel connected to them and bonded to them, like they're almost part of you. And without oxytocin, it's really hard to create emotional bonds or to maintain emotional relationships. People who don't produce enough of it, they struggle to feel connected. And it's also hard to be emotionally vulnerable and intimate because, well, you don't feel that safety or that connection. And so, yeah, women receive massive doses during pregnancy and breastfeeding. Women generally, though, even without that, have about 10 times the amount of oxytocin in their system than men. It's generally thought that's why women tend to be more caring and nurturing, why they create emotional bonds easier. And when you have sex, the oxytocin increase, it actually goes up in women, and it lasts about 2 days, with the effects lasting even longer. Men, on the other hand, don't get nearly as much oxytocin, neither in our development or through the life stages. Men, we just exist with much lower levels on a day-to-day basis, like 1/10 of what you do. And that makes it very difficult for us to bond emotionally with others. You can talk to, I don't know, when I talk to women, they feel much more connected to their other women friends than men do. Men are friends, but our friendships are very much based on things that we've done. Like men who have army buddies are like the best friends ever. Men who have friends that grew up with them in high school, they're very good friends because it has taken them decades to build up a relationship. But there's a lot of women who all of a sudden they friend and they just click, and all of a sudden they are best friends, and it doesn't take much time at all in some cases. And I think this is because of this heightened oxytocin. But men, once our oxytocin levels jump 5 times what our normal levels are. It's a much higher increase than what women get from sex. And while it still doesn't reach what our wives usually have, it brings us at least into the range of feeling, I think, what you guys feel all the time, or that ability to feel emotionally connected. And it only lasts for about 30 minutes, those levels. And the effects only last a day or two in general. Sometimes more for some people, sometimes less. And you may find this, that like, if you can manage to keep him awake after sex and have a conversation with you, you may have some of the best conversations of your entire marriage right after he's had an orgasm, because that's when his oxytocin levels are ramped up as high as they're going to go. And all of a sudden he feels connected and bonded and safe, and it's okay to be vulnerable, and it's not as scary. So he may share some things with you then that he was never have shared before. Let me know in the chat if you've ever experienced that. I know some of our best conversations have happened over sex, because even me knowing that this is what happens, it still works. So yeah, this was a simple chart I made years ago. That's why it's fuzzy. Our oxytocin levels, they just peak at orgasm, and then 30 minutes after, back down to normal. And most men have no idea that this is going on. All they know is that they don't feel good. They don't feel connected. So, well, they don't even know they don't feel connected. They just know they don't feel good, that something is wrong. And in general, I think most husbands lack the emotional awareness and vocabulary to express what they feel, that they feel disconnected and unloved and uncared for and insecure and abandoned. And that is a lot of big, scary emotions for someone who isn't aware of what he's feeling, isn't able to communicate what he's feeling in an adequate way. Because I find that women grow up being trained in how to communicate about emotions, about how to categorize emotions, about what emotions they're feeling. You know, when my daughters feel hurt, you know, my wife will go to them and say, "Oh, how do you feel? Do you feel this? Do you feel this? Do you feel lonely?" When guys go to their fathers and feel something, usually the fathers go, "Well, you probably have to eat something or hit something. Which is it? You know, you're either angry or hungry." Those are the two emotions that we're allowed to have. I'm trying to do better with my sons, but it's certainly not the way I was raised. I was not taught to discuss my emotions growing up, and most men aren't. So we not only lack the practice of kind of introspectively looking at our emotions and figuring out what they are, but then we also lack the vocabulary. You know, if you've never been able to talk about what's the difference between feeling kind of insecure or unloved or uncared for or disconnected or abandoned or any of these words, like those all look like I have no idea what those are. And it's taken me years to start trying to figure out what these are. At the beginning, I would ask my wife a lot. I was like, I feel something. I don't know what it is. It's not good. And that's about as far as I could get. And she would help me say, okay, well, you know, do you feel like this? Do you feel like this? Do you feel like this? No. Oh, yeah, that one. And then I would know what they are, because I knew all these words, but I didn't necessarily know what they felt like. I think a lot of other husbands have the same experience. I know they do, because I talk to them and they tell me this. Anyways, and most, I don't have a stat on this, but most of the ones I talk to, they can start feeling this way after only a couple of days after you've last had sex, because that oxytocin level has already crashed 2 days ago, and the effect only lasts for so long. And sometimes this leads to wives feeling like, well, why does nothing else I do matter? Why is it all about sex? Why is it always about sex? Why is sex the only thing? And it's not. All the other stuff does matter. All the other connections, the conversations, the touches, the gestures, everything matters. But without that oxytocin, your husband is going to find it a lot harder to recognize and accept and see those other gestures, because he doesn't feel connected. He doesn't feel bonded. He feels just disconnected and abandoned and unloved. And when someone is doing something loving for you and you can't see it because you don't feel loved, you know, that's a hard place to be in, especially when you can't communicate about it. Either because you don't have the vocabulary, or you don't know what's going on with you, or just the stigma of, you know, real men don't communicate about their emotions, especially when they're not feeling good. Unless it's angry. That one's acceptable. Or hungry, like we said. I think the three allowed are hungry, angry, and horny. Rosalind says, good question. Which question was a good question? Does nothing else I do matter? Is it all about sex? One of those two? I'm going to give this a couple seconds to catch up. All right. I don't know if she's responding. I'll keep an eye out for it. Anyways, yes, does nothing else I do matter? It does matter. All right, let's go back to this for a sec. If all you do is have sex every other day because that's the oxytocin schedule, it still won't be enough. Because it's kind of like oil in your engine. You know, if you put gas in the engine because what the engine needs is gas, then yeah, it's going to go somewhere, but it's going to burn out because it can't use it. You know, there's too much friction. The amount of gas doesn't matter if the engine is seized. But if all you do is put oil in the engine's still not going to go anywhere. Sure, it's going to be ready, but it's got no fuel. So sex matters. It's not the most important thing. It's not the fuel, but it's more like the oil. Without it, you're still not going to go anywhere. And you can manage to have a marriage that has no sex. It's difficult. It takes a lot of intentionality. You're pushing an uphill battle because you're running an engine without oil and it's on the brink of seizing. But if you have a marriage without all the other stuff, the loving gestures, the communication, everything else, I don't care how much sex you're having, it's not going to survive. Does that answer the question? You say, got it. Thank you. All right. I might have already answered it before. All right. So without oxytocin, yeah, your husband's fighting a constant battle between what his mind knows and what his brain feels. I still feel this myself. I know how this stuff works, and I've known for about a decade now. And it still happens that if we don't have sex very often, I am telling myself, no, my wife loves me. She cares for me. This is not what's going on. She's not abandoning me. I'm not unconnected. I just don't feel it right now because of the oxytocin. But it still doesn't change how my brain feels. And the other part of me is telling me that, oh, she's doing it because she doesn't care about you, or she's trying to hurt you, or something else. These are the thoughts that go through our heads, even when we know that they're wrong. And I will argue with myself, because as much as that we think that our brain is one single thing, it's actually not. It's a multitude of systems that are all connected together, and it's kind of running like a voting system. And sometimes the one part of the brain outvotes other parts of the brain. And I know you guys probably know that you have multiple different voices in your head, because I talk to wives and they're like, yeah, part of my brain says, yes, we should have sex. And another part of my brain says, but I don't want to. And so I know you have at least two parts going on. We have the same thing. We have the part of our brain that's like, I know my wife loves me. And the other one that's go, but I don't feel like it right now. And so, sorry, I had a window pop up on my computer. It messed me up. Yes, he knows that you love him, but he begins to feel like you do not. And this feeling is chemical, and it's very difficult to ignore. Because his brain will start telling him that your actions don't match your words, and it will start painting you as a hypocrite. Because if you keep saying, yes, I love you, yes, I love you, yes, I love you, but he's not getting any oxytocin to let him feel that you love him, then, well, you're fighting against his chemicals. And that is a very difficult thing to do. And eventually he'll start to feel used and take it for granted, because, frankly, he just can't feel that love, regardless of how you love him. Love the oil and gas metaphor. My husband is a toll car guy. Makes so much sense to me. Good. You can explain it to him, and then he'll get it. I just came up with that on the spot. I was pretty happy with it. So without oxytocin, yeah, he'll also have a harder time facing temptation, because his brain is telling him that he has nothing to fight for. You know, along with the oxytocin making you feel bonded, there's also another hormone called vasopressin that also gets released during sex in men. And it makes you want to protect your spouse, both physically and emotionally. It's the things that make you say, "Oh, I would die for my spouse," and they mean it, because there's this hugely strong, like, chemical, like, no, I have to protect this person. That's what vasopressin does, amongst other things. But if that's all gone and depleted, well, now his brain is telling him the opposite. Why would you bother sacrificing for this person? She clearly doesn't care for you, right? That's the chemical messages that he's going to get now. And this entire struggle is largely subconscious for most people. They don't realize it's happening. And that's why I think this verse exists in 1 Corinthians 7, verse 5. Not to deprive each other, except for consent. Because if you do it with consent, if you decide, okay, we're going to take off a week to do fasting and prayer, or a month, you can fight this for a short time, but not for a long time. It says, and then come together again. Some verses says, and then quickly come together again, so that Satan does not tempt you, because he will be tempted. And it's not because he's a bad man, and it's not because, he's sinful. Everyone gets tempted. To be tempted is not a sin. Jesus was tempted. But we have systems in us. We live in a broken world. We have broken bodies. And the fact is that it's very hard to fight against them sometimes. So from my perspective, my wife has other temptations different from mine. And I know some of her temptations. She strongly has ADHD, so she gets distracted very easily. So one of her temptations is often to get distracted by things, Facebook on her phone, for example. And so sometimes I have to go to her and say, hey, is that what you want to be doing right now? and that may sound cruel, but she actually appreciates it sometimes. Sometimes she gets frustrated, mostly with herself and her brain. But my job is to help her resist temptation, to not do the things she knows she doesn't want to do. And so I try to help her as much as I can. And she, in turn, she tries to help me with things as well. And one of them is, hey, we have sex fairly regularly, because she knows if we don't, it's harder for me. I mean, I can still manage it, but it's harder. And why would you make this harder for your spouse? I don't try to put distractions in front of my wife when I know she's supposed to be doing something else, because I know it's going to make things a lot harder for her. So I don't do it. So what does sex mean for your husband? Sex helps him feel loved. And sex alone will not make him feel loved, but it will help him feel safe and secure in that emotional bond. It allows him to feel that you love him. Like the oil and gas metaphor. I'm going to have to remember that. I got to write that down somewhere. So for men, a lot of men, I want sex means I feel disconnected. It means I don't feel loved. And a lot of times they may not realize, like I said, what's going on with them, but in their brain, they're fighting this, I know you love me. I want to feel that. And sex is what helps them do that. And in a lot of cases, what they're really trying to say, if they had the vocabulary and the mental awareness and the emotional awareness to know what they were going through, they would instead say something like, I miss you. I feel disconnected. I'm scared that our relationship is drifting and that you don't love me. And I want to feel connected to you and to bond with you so that I can feel safe and secure in our marriage and to know that you love me. And so when your husband says, I want sex, or I'm horny, or something like that, this is what you should hear. And yes, it would be amazing if all the husbands could actually say this. And I'm trying to teach them, but it's a hard process. So in the meantime, you might have to help them out and do some translating. So when you think all he thinks about sex, what it really means is all he thinks about is being emotionally connected to you so that he can feel loved and cared for and emotionally secure. And I think that's a very different message than what a lot of wives get. So, what do you think of that so far? We still got another part to go, but I'm curious. I want to hear some comments. We got 34 people in the room, 33 people. One just left. Maybe they didn't like what I said. I don't know. I'm going to grab a drink of water. All right. Good stuff. All right. Good stuff is good. Loving this information. Fantastic. A lot of this sounds like me more than my husband. Is that normal? All right. Here's the problem with normal. What do you mean by normal? Do you mean average? Or do you mean acceptable? Or do you mean not weird? Because normal is very vague. And usually what people want to know is, am I broken? Or am I weird? Or is there a problem? And yeah, okay. So is this normal as in average? This sounds more like you than your husband. Is it average? No. I'd say about, if I remember right, about a quarter to a third of wives have a higher sex drive than their husband. So for them, these roles might be reversed. So average, no, it's lower than average. But is it normal? Yeah, you're not the only one. There's at least another quarter to a third of wives that feel the same way that you do. So you're okay. Maybe we should get your husband to listen to this one. I keep meaning to make a course for husbands, but it's so much harder. For husbands that are low drive, I mean, it's really hard because they don't want to talk about it. And usually the answers are not the same. So it's difficult. I am working on it though. All right. Had no idea men thought this way. Yeah, that's what I thought. Nobody's talking about this stuff. I wish they did. Yes, Angela sounds more like where I'm at. My husband has a lower drive and it doesn't seem interested. Okay. Hildy, yeah, it could be a whole bunch of things. The problem with lower drive husbands, like I said, is they don't want to talk about it, and the reasons aren't as similar as wives who have lower drives. They tend to be all over that map, and it tends to be more individualistic. So if you want to, shoot me an email. We can talk about it and try to brainstorm some stuff. Lisa says, enlightening. Awesome. Hey, Lisa, I think I just got an email from your husband earlier. He was trying to get you into the forum, if I remember right. So we're going to do that after this. All right, let's keep going. Understanding the sex cycles. Right. Okay. So taking everything you learned from part 2, because these things tend to build on each other, we have 2 different sex cycles that I see. That's the wrong window. There we go. Okay. So we have Satan's plan versus God's plan for sex in marriage. And Satan's plan kind of looks like this. You got to think of this as a cycle. So first is, and it can start anywhere, but let's say your husband comes to you for sex, or he says, I'm in the mood. Are you in the mood? Which is a terrible question to ask. I'm trying to get them to stop asking that question. But let's say he does it anyways, and you reject him. So then, of course, he feels unloved and uncared for and emotionally insecure due to a drop in oxytocin, which we talked about. And he's less interested in protecting you due to a drop in vasopressin, which I also mentioned. And so then he becomes less attentive, emotionally and physically. And his brain starts looking for a new source of oxytocin, because that's what brains do. Something, they're looking for it. And it's a chemical thing. That's just the way brains are wired, not just human brains. And then, of course, you are less interested in connecting emotionally with him due to a drop of oxytocin in yourself, if it's been even longer. And as well, he's not being as attentive anymore, and he's not protecting you as much. And you might notice that, oh, maybe he's going to look for something else to spend his time on, like golf well, I mean, golf wife is the joke, but it tends to be more like video games or something else. And so then, of course, he may come back again and go, hey, are you in the mood tonight? Because he still feels disconnected. And of course, now, well, you're even less likely to say yes. And so we start the cycle all over again. And unfortunately, this cycle actually tends to turn into a spiral. And the worst case I've seen is I had a pastor come to me quite a few years ago, and he won't mind me sharing. He's told me I could. He sent me an email once saying, hey, my wife and I haven't had sex in 25 years. What do we do? And the whole thing started kind of with this. And it started, and eventually they got to a point that they got stuck and they couldn't get out of it. And neither of them would talk about it because they're pastors and they were in their 60s at the time. And you try telling a pastor who's 65, who grew up 60 years ago, and say, hey, you have to have a conversation with your wife about sex. You know, the thought never occurred to him that, hey, they could actually talk about this. Anyways, they did talk about it and they fixed it, and boom, they were off to the races. Like, they were having sex 3 times a day for the next, I can't remember how long. He actually emailed me later and said, what do I do? My penis is starting to hurt. We're having too much sex. I'm like, slow down. Like, you can talk about this. So he finally learned to talk to his wife about sex, and then they were pretty happy. But the point is, you have to be careful with these things, because if you let this go too long, it gets very difficult to turn it around. You don't want to wake up 25 years later and go, oh, I wish we had not done this. Because this plan results in 4 potential outcomes that I could see. You either get divorced, which I can't tell you how many husbands and wives email me saying, my spouse never wants to have sex with me. I'm thinking about leaving. And that sucks. The other emails I get are, I don't know what to do, but I feel like I'm stuck because we have kids and a house and whatever else. And divorce, we can't divorce. So how do I live with knowing my spouse doesn't love me? Which usually isn't true, but it's how they feel. Affairs, of course, because it's a lot harder to ward off temptation when you feel like you have nothing to fight for and you're never going to feel loved again in your own marriage. And of course, number 4, which is the hopeful one, which is that pastor who had the 25-year sexless marriage did. He escaped the cycle. It's very difficult to get this thing going in the other direction, but it is possible. It takes work. It takes intentionality. It takes uncomfortable conversations, but it's definitely possible. And I think anybody can do it, as long as both spouses are actually in the marriage. And the other side, we have God's plan, which I think is what he actually planned. Because he actually put all these chemicals in us. And I think he did it for a purpose. So let's say you have sex with an engaged and generous attitude, and he feels accepted and loved because his oxytocin is through the roof from his normal experiences. And so he feels invested in protecting and providing for you due to a boost in vasopressin as well. And he's more willing to talk and to share and to help and to make you feel more loved and safe and secure and connected, and all the good things that come with a whole bunch of oxytocin, as well as dopamine and serotonin and vasopressin and all the things. And so your oxytocin levels actually increase because, you get oxytocin a lot easier than we do. Like hugs will boost your oxytocin. Our hugs will boost our oxytocin too, but it's minuscule. But when he's more caring and doing non-sexual touches and all the thing and helping you out, then you feel connected because your oxytocin is even higher than it usually is. And so your relationship deepens. So then the next time he says, hey, do you want to have some fun tonight? You're like, yeah, that sounds like fun. And so the cycle keeps going. And now that is a spiral that is very hard to break as well, but in a good way. And I only see one potential outcome from this, is that you have a truly intimate and vulnerable marriage. And the only second potential outcome is if you don't keep it going. And if you actually let it spiral in the other direction. It happens. It's much harder, but it happens. I heard, what was the quote? The price of freedom is eternal vigilance, something like that. I think it was Washington, maybe. It's one of the presidents, I think. Anyways, point is, all marriages take work and they take investments. You can't just go, oh, well, once we start down this path, it'll all be fine. It won't, but it'll be easier. That I can promise. And so I got a challenge for you, because it's 8:30, so it's been an hour. The challenge is quite simply, and this is a hard one, try to stop saying no when you want sex. And no's can be expressed in a lot of ways, because I have a lot of wives who say, oh, I never say no. And I say, well, what do you say when you don't want to? Are you dropping your shoulders? Are you rolling your eyes? Do you slump? Do you go, all right? They all mean the same thing to your husband. And that you find the thought of emotionally connecting with him unappealing, because that's what he's going to feel. You may think that you're saying no to sex, but what he's hearing is you're saying no to him. Not sex with him, but him as an individual. But if you stop saying no, then the question usually from wives is, well, what happens if he just wants sex every day? And he might, for a little bit. My wife actually decided to do this. I didn't ask her to. She decided one day, and she told me, I'm never going to say no again. And I was like, really? Because we had a sexless marriage for a while, 5 years or something like that. Not completely like no sex, but like 10 times a year or less. And all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, it took her a while to come around to this. And I'll be honest, I went a little crazy. We had sex, I think, 13 days in a row. And then we take a day off. And then I think another 7 or something like that. And we actually were doing like a 7 days of sex challenge. No, we did 7 and then a 1 day break and then 13. And after that, I realized I don't actually want sex every day. It's exhausting. I thought I did, and I did for 20 days. And then we kind of settled into every 2 to 3 days. And that's been better for both of us. And so he might go crazy for a bit and want sex every day. I think it's because, frankly, he's not going to trust you. If you've had a habit of saying no, or to pushing him off, or to otherwise kind of shutting him down, he's going to have trouble trusting that it's real. So he might test it. Just kind of like kids do. They test barriers. And so he's going to test you as well. Maybe. But what is going to happen is he's probably going to feel more safe and secure in your marriage than he ever has before. He's going to feel like sex isn't being used as a weapon from you against him. He's going to feel like a man, because men often equate getting lots of sex to being more manly. Right or wrong, the fact is, this is the way we're raised. And you can use that, actually, not in a manipulative way, but if you actually have more sex, which I think God intended, that actually will encourage him to be more like the husband that you want. And I think you'll see a transformation in your marriage like you wouldn't believe. And I know this because I see it over and over and over again. And this is why I tell the husbands not to join this one, because if you tell your wife, there are a couple of husbands here listening, if you tell your wife this, it's not going to go well. It's going to sound manipulative. But for the wives who are listening, you come to this decision on your own and decide to do it, it will change your marriage for the better. And don't believe me? Try it. And see what happens. So let's recap what we went over. We talked about what the Bible has to say about sex. We talked about biblical rights and duties. That's more about generosity of spirit towards your husband. We talked about giving yourself, your attitude, your heart, your mind, your body. We talked about oxytocin and vasopressin and all that stuff. We talked about what sex means to your husband and what he means when he says, I want sex. We talked about the sex cycles. And that's most of the stuff in this module. There's a few more bits and pieces in there, and oh, Janice, transformation. This is what happened when I started saying yes. That and hormone replacement therapy. Yeah, hormone replacement therapy really does help for some people. I don't think it's a solution for everybody, but yeah, if your hormone levels are low, definitely something to check into. Makes it easier to say yes. Anyways, if you want more information about like this, then we have the course I've been talking about. We're going to quickly go through this. What's in the course? I have 7 modules. Each of them have three lessons, kind of like what you've seen. They come in your inbox every other day. I think every 3 days, actually. I changed it. One of the feedback that we got from the pilot group is that it was too fast. And they're like, I need more time to process. So I was like, okay, how about another day? And they're like, that would be great. So we changed it from every 2 days to every 3 days. And they said, oh, that's much better. So there's 7 challenges as well through the course, 1 for each module. They help kind of like solidify the learning. They will radically change your marriage. And it's not, the fear I get from wives is like, oh, this feels like it's a lot of work and it's all going to be for him. And it won't be, I promise. I'll get there in a second. There's also bonus lessons for those wives who really want to stretch themselves. And there's also an online community of Christian wives to help you support as you grow. We have a forum. It's only wives that are taking the course. So you know they're wives that are invested in their marriages and focusing on the same things. And they can help you. They might be ahead and might be behind in the course. Most of them will be around the same time. Also, our pilot group is in there, so they might jump back in and answer questions from somebody who's actually been through them. And you get lifetime access to the content. As long as I have Uncovering Intimacy up, you can have it. I also send you a PDF at the end of the course. I had one of the wives write this. They said, I don't know which one. I asked for anonymous feedback at the end because I wanted to know what they really thought. And one of them said, I just want to thank you for offering such a thoughtful, meaningful, and complete course. The content was so full of information that I would gladly take it again. So if you're curious, the modules are being more open to your experiences. That's the one we kind of just went through. Second was learning to get naked, because a lot of people have a lot of problems with that. We feel a lot of shame about bodies. So we talk about what this actually means and why you shouldn't. And third is learning to communicate about and during sex, because communication is kind of one of those things that everyone has problems with it generally as well. Learning to get excited about sex. That's what I hear from a lot of wives is, how do I get excited about this? So we show you. Learning to initiate sex. What I hear from a lot of husbands and from the wives is, I've never initiated sex before. Or well, the wives tell me that the husbands tell me their wives have never initiated before. So I kind of teach you how to do it. Then how to keep sex kind of exciting and interesting. Making sure monogamy isn't monotony. Fun little play on words. And then how to fit intimacy into a busy life. Like I said, we have 5 kids. We homeschool. I have a day job. And then this, we have busy lives. My wife is an online fitness instructor. She just started this year. So we got lots of stuff going on. You can manage. And then, like I said, bonus chapters for those who really want to knock their husbands off their feet. Knock the socks off their husband's feet. Something like that. And then there's a whole bunch of reviews on the site if you'd like. Heather said, this course transformed my marriage. Not just in the sexual intimacy, it changed a lot of areas too. And that's what I kind of wanted to point out, that you will not just see your sex life change. You will see your entire marriage change. Linda, if I remember right, she was in her 60s. She said that this course was very instrumental in giving this old girl her groove back. Renee took this course very hesitantly, but it gave me a new perspective on God's intended design for intimacy in marriage. We had a couple of wives who went, I'll try it. And they still loved it. And Ashley said it's super helpful and highly recommended to all marriages, even if you were just looking for a new way to look at your sex life. And our pilot group, we actually got some stats out of them because I asked for a bunch of data from them along the way. And this is what we found out, that 23% of them actually increased how often they wanted sex. They all increased how often they wanted sex by an average of 23%. They all started having sex more often. 53% increase in intimacy, in frequency. So if they were at twice a week, they went to 3 times a week. They started initiating sex twice as often. Plus, some of them who had never initiated before started. And they actually got more out of their sex life. About 40%, 38% increase in what they considered sexual satisfaction in their own marriages. So this isn't just for your husbands. These are the findings from the wives. I didn't even ask the husbands how it improved their lives because it wasn't for them. And this was really cool. Their sexual confidence more than doubled. Going in, most of the wives on average said that their confidence was about I think it was a 3.8 out of 10 on average. And at the end, they were scoring at about an 8 on average. So that was pretty cool. I'm kind of proud of that, to be honest. That's an incredible stat. And I wasn't quite expecting that one. And another person said, this was a fantastic course. I'm so thankful it exists. It has helped my sex life and marriage so much. After some time has passed, I would love to take it again. I would take it again in a heartbeat. Also, some of the wives found that their ability to orgasm increased, which was neat. One of the other people said, it was just good. I found out so much I didn't know that we wives are completely unaware of. I have a typo there. I should fix that. And all the wives said it was worth the investment, both in time and money. Oh, sorry. My youngest is interrupting me. Looking for his mom. All right. I'm not going to read through all these because they basically just say nice things. So if you're listening to this, well, you put up with me talking for more than an hour. So I'm going to give you $50 off the course. And yeah, I think there was a way I can make it so that you can do that thing. Publish. There we go. Does that work? I think you can just click the button and it automatically will go to the thing and take off the $50. So if you're interested, you can do that. You don't have to check out now. You can think about it. The offer is not going away. If you want to, just write down the discount code BMSE webinar. You can put it in the checkout. I'll leave it open for a week. Trying to start a group going through in February. Usually it takes everyone kind of a week to get in and get settled anyway. So we'll keep this offer open for the next week. I hate high pressure sales that like, oh, you have to buy now within the next 20 minutes. I don't do that because I think a lot of you probably want to discuss it with your spouse or whether it's worth it. Some of you might not. I've had some people who do it without telling them. Either way, it works. But if you're interested, there's the information. I can email you guys this as well, just in case, so you have it. All right. Hopefully everybody wrote it down if they want to. And lastly, questions? I'm up for any questions. Rosalind said, wonderful information. Thank you so very much. You are very welcome. I hope you enjoyed yourself. Hope everyone did. I've got nothing else to talk about. So we can just consider this an open Q&A. If you have questions, ask your questions. Now or never. Just kidding. If you ever have questions, you can just email me. Jay@uncoveringintimacy. People email me all kinds of questions. Some of which you see on the blog and the podcast. Yeah, I don't know. I have this slide, but I have a feeling everybody knows where to find me. Rosalind, I did what? I don't know what I did. All right. Other than that, I'm just going to hang around for a bit if people have questions. Yeah. Okay. So, Paula, I'm definitely willing to give this a try. Yeah. something I don't tend to advertise, but if you go through it in a week and you go like, you know what, a weekend, I'm deciding this is not for me, it's not working, or my life is just blown up a moment. I had one person, she started and then she broke her leg, and then something else happened, and something else happened. Like her life fell apart. She's like, I can't do this right now. What can I do? I'm like, look, I have no problem refunding you or putting it on pause. What do you want to do? So if you get through a week of it and you're like, I can't handle this right now, or this is not for me, I have no problem refunding. If you get through 3 modules of it and then decide, I'm like, no, like, I have put it on hold for people, but I'm not refunding at that point, because at that point I'm paying for platform fees and everything. It gets expensive. Will there be another group later? Yes. It takes about, I should mention this. It takes about 3 months to actually go through the whole thing. If you're thinking, yeah, it's every 3 days. A lesson goes out. There are like 24 lessons, 27 with the extras. So it takes a while to get through everything. So I'm probably going to rerun another one in 3 months, something like that. So 4 times a year. So yes, there will be another group later for Shelby. I did enjoy myself. Good. Oh, that was the ID. I did. Good. Thank you. Appreciate all you've shared over the years. No problem. I love helping people. And the discount will be good for a week, so I can sign up next Friday. Yeah, no problem. In fact, if you miss it and it's closed and you still want to sneak in, if it's a couple of days over, I'm not going to hold you to it. My biggest hang-up is my body image, feeling like he must be lying when I said I'm beautiful, so I'm pretty, etc. I want sex more than he does sometimes, but feeling physically insecure holds me back from initiating ever. Yeah, I get this from a lot of wives. You know what? I did a survey a while back. If you didn't see it, I asked husbands, hey, what did I ask them? I asked them, are you more or less attracted or the same to your wife now than when you married? And 96% of them said they were more attracted to their wife now than the day that they got married. And they said it is regardless of weight gain or health issues or mobility or age, nothing. 96% said, yes, I'm more attracted now than the day that we got married. And that makes sense, because everything I know about neuroscience tells me that the longer that we're with something, as long as we're thinking positively about it, the more our brain makes us like it. So, yeah, I think a lot of the stuff about our hangups have to do with, it's our own stuff. Most of the time our spouses they don't see what we see. My wife constantly thinks like, why do you want to see me naked? And I look at her and go, why would I not want to see you naked? You're sexy. She's like, I don't see it. I'm like, you don't have to. I do. Like, that's not your job. So, and I go through that. One of the courses is about, one of the modules. I mean, where's my list of modules? There we go. Learning to get naked. Yeah. So that one, we go through body image issues, and actually we spend a lot of time looking at what the Bible says about our body. And I don't know, I had a lot of people say that, that one kind of solved their body image issues. It might not for everybody. I can't promise that, but it definitely might help. And I definitely don't think your husband's lying about it when he thinks you're beautiful, pretty, etc. Nope, I don't believe it. Most guys are pretty truthful about stuff like that. Are there webinars during these lessons? I don't actually have webinars during the lessons, because it's kind of you get an email every 3 days, but you can do it at your own pace. And I couldn't find a time to do webinars that everybody could jump on. So if I made the webinar part of the course, then a bunch of people would be kind of missing out on it. And I couldn't find a way to do that fairly, because I have people who take it in Australia and the UK and Canada and the US and all over the place. So thank you. The information exceeded my expectations. Awesome. That's what I like to hear. I appreciate the kindness at which you speak and the spiritual guidance for something that is often so worldly. I do my best. Thank you for the nice feedback. How time consuming is the course? I'm a stay-at-home mom, and I'm also in my last semester of my master's. Oh my goodness. That's busy. That's a lot, but I feel like something like this might help get rid of at least this area of stress in my life. I just don't know if I have the time to commit right now. All right. So, Kay, you got a couple choices. How time consuming is the course? All right. It's like one blog post to read, or not a week, every 3 days. So that's what, 2 to 3 a week. So that take you not too long. I encourage you to participate in the forums. How much you participate is up to you. It's not like you don't get a grade for the course. It's it's purely for your own benefit. I'm not going to give you a certificate at the end. But I found one of the other stats I found is the people that participate in the forum more got more of a benefit out of the course. So I don't have a metric for how much time that takes. If you're in your last semester of your master's, honestly, I'd be tempted to say wait until you're done your master's. But if you want, you can also try it out, run it for a week. If it's not working for you, we can put it on pause and restart it when you're done your master's. So, does that answer your question, Kay? All right, Angela, I think you said initiation is discussed in the course. Yes, learning to initiate sex. That's a big issue for us. I feel like my husband doesn't ever initiate, and I'm sick of initiating. My question is there sometimes miscommunication about this? Like one spouse thinks they are, and the other isn't getting the message. Yes, definitely. Angela, if you are the one initiating, I forgot, were you one of the ones that said that you were the higher drive spouse? I can't remember. If you were, this course may not be for you. I did not build this course for wives who are higher drive. Usually it's the ones that are more the lower drive / responsive drive. Okay. So this course might frustrate you, honestly. Yeah. I hate to say it, but this one might not be for you. But to answer your question, is there sometimes miscommunication about initiating? 100% all the time. Usually the biggest communication is one spouse says, I am initiating, and the other one thinks, no, you're not, because their definitions of initiating are completely different. For example, a lot of times the lower drive spouse thinks initiating means being available. So they'll be like, I did initiate, I came to bed early. And for them, that was, I made myself available, therefore I initiated. And whereas the other spouse goes, that's not initiating, that's just, you're there. So, yeah, definitely. I think you have to talk together and say, this is what initiation means to me. What does it mean to you? And then if they say, well, it means being available, then stop saying, I want you to initiate. Instead say, this is what I want you to do. Does that help? Okay, sounds good. Talk to my husband about it. Okay. If you have any questions, just email me. All right. Any more questions? I don't think I have anything else. 35% of the people found us in the last year. Interesting. Is that poll still standing up? Maybe I should have ended that. Man. I need the class for higher drive wives, please. Yeah. I got to make one of those. You know, let me think about that. I think I might have enough stuff now that I could. It's taken me a bit to build it, but I will be looking for a pilot group if I do. Yeah, I think there might be some stuff that we could do. Of course, for lower drive husbands, I always thought was, well, Not impossible, very difficult. Still, I think outside of my reach. But the web side of it, that might be possible. Okay. I'm going to have to do some thinking about that. Never thought about tackling it from the side before. All right. Any more questions? What else you have going on? Oh, I put that on the wrong screen. That's okay. All right. Doesn't seem like there's any more questions, and people are slowly leaving. So I'm glad people had fun. I had fun. I'm glad the system worked out. No complaints from people saying they couldn't get in or no sound or anything like that. That's good. The last system I tried was a nightmare. Katie says, thanks. No problem. Thanks, Katie, for showing up. Okay. That was the last slide. Okay. All right. I think I'm going to take off then. Last chance for questions, or you can email them to me. Nothing? Thank you and bless your ministry. Ah, thank you. You're very welcome. I quite enjoy doing this stuff, actually. All right. Well, good night, all. I'm going to go help put all my kids to bed, because if you have kids, you know that every night they forget that bedtime is something that happens. Thank you for this insightful information. You're very welcome. Love to share this type of stuff. This was great. Thanks. You're welcome. All right. That's it. Oh, I might send you an email with a few questions explaining our context a little. I love context. That would be amazing. Much prefer questions with context. So much easier than questions without context, as you can see from some of our podcast questions. Some of them are just impossibly lacking on context. All right. I'm going to head out. There's only 8 people left. Good night, everybody. Or good morning if you're in Australia. Bye.